She checked the sled lashings and the leather satchel by lantern glow. The spirit thermometer read -71 degrees Celsius. Mercury buried at the bulb. On the clinic shelf, gauze, clamps, dried herbs, bulb, syringe, insulin vials. The radio carried short, static. 6 requests had stacked before dawn to labors. A boy found cold at the fish racks. A stranded elder needing insulin. Premature pains across the river. An injury near the logging spur. Wind drew snow into ropes along the lane and erased the last tracks. She pulled on felt boots, drew the fur hood tight, and taped the old scarred fingers. Hooves shifted in the lean-to. The pony's breath crusted to frost. She set a route in her head west. Then north, by the black spruce, rise counting distances and margins. She lifted the satchel to the sled, sealed the door against the draft, and stepped into the white as the day tightened like a knot. The storm belt had slipped down from the Arctic shelf and pressed the Sacaplane flat. Villagers clung to the bends of a buried river, each a cluster of board houses, sheds, and low barns with their doors banked in snow. The tiger stood in black ranks beyond, larch and spruce bearded with hoarfrost, branches hardened to glass. Between settlements, ice roads stitched the land-white lanes over muskeg and gravel, flagged by willow wands that sometimes vanished in the drift. Cold like this hammered decisions into simple shapes. Fuel, heat, calories, roots. Families burned large and scrap boards. Iron stoves reddened. Kettles steamed beside racks of drying felt. Reindeer and hardy ponies shared lean-tos with stacked hay and salt blocks. Dogs slept in pits packed with straw. Diesel hung in the air with wood smoke and iodine. Frost crept from door latches to lamp chimneys and made crystals on the inside of windows. The clinic had a single room for everything. Exam table, birthing corner, a cupboard with gauze, clamps, needle kits, tinctures, and the battered case for insulin and syringes. Neighbors swapped news by radio when the battery took a charge. A lantern lit the logbook and the list of names. Tracks between houses turned to shallow trenches, then disappeared. In that white distance felt longer than maps, and every errand became a crossing. She pushed into the first drift and felt the sled jerk sideways, the left runner skidding on wind-polished crust. The radio coughed, then dimmed. Battery in the red. She rationed her breath, pulling air through felt and fur until the needles of cold settled in her throat. The pony balked at an iced rut. She led it by the cheek strap, boots punching through layers that rang like thin tin dot. At the river road, the wind turned and took the lane, laying a seam of powder that hid the old cutbank. She probed with a willow staff, step by step, counting to keep rhythm and warmth. At the fish racks, a shed door had blown open, and she wedged it shut with a plank, fingers threatening to lock. The scar in her hand woke with ache. She checked the satchel gauze clamps, vial cased, then tucked her chin and angled west toward the first house. Already recalculating who could wait and who could not, the teen mother's house breathed steam through its eaves. She found the girl curled under reindeer hides, the air thin with fear and kerosene. She measured belly and back with practiced palms, timed the contractions, and brewed a sharp tea. Warm bottles wrapped in wool went to the inner thighs. She taught the ant to keep the heat constant while the storm ran. The panes spaced wider. She marked the time in the log and promised a return check, then stepped back into the white. At the fish camp, a boy lay slumped beside the net shed, clothes crinkled with frost. She slid him against her undercoat and layered fur over skin, the old method when stoves failed. Sweet tea concentrate melted on his tongue. A dull pulse began to climb. He stirred, teeth chattering again, and she left him with his uncle and strict orders for stoking and broth. The elder's house sat behind a fence drifted to the top rail. Inside, the stove smoked, and the insulin pen's plunger had frozen halfway. She warmed it in the crook of her elbow, swapped a needle, checked sugar with a paper strip and a practiced eye, then dosed low and steady. She split kindling to keep the fire clean and taught the granddaughter to angle the vent and rotate the logs. When the call came from the breech labor, she cut across a buried track where willow markers leaned at odd angles. The mother labored, standing, hips loose, breath sawed short by the cold. With blankets and gravity, she coaxed the infant to turn. Slow and sure, then rested the mother on her side with her knees drawn. She prepped a transfer that might not come, packed cloth, checked the cord kit, and listened to the wind try the seams of the cabin. Whiteout thickened until the cabin lights blurred to halos. The sled's axle seized, a crust of ice locking the turn. She levered it with the pry bar and struck the joint with the flat of the wrench until the runner shuddered free. The radio lamp thinned to a sliver. She chose the ridge route, wind-scoured but higher, and hauled the pony by the cheek strap until the roofline appeared, half buried under a windward drift. Inside, blood varnished the floorboards in thin, dark arcs. The mother lay pale, belly slack, a soiled cloth packed hard against her. She boiled water, laid out clamps on a folded towel, and pressed down, steady and unbroken, until the tone changed under her hands. She mixed a uterotonic tea from bark and dried leaf, sweetened it, lifted the cup to the mother's lips, and massaged the fundus in slow circles, counting rises of breath. The bleeding slowed to a seep, then a stain. Another contraction crested from the back room, sharp and unstoppable. The second mother braced against a post, hair packed with frost. The infant slid blue and limp onto the towel. She wiped mouth and nose, pressed 2 fingers at the heel of the jaw to open the airway, and suctioned with the bulb until a thin thread of mucus gave way. She wrapped the body against her underlayer, rubbed limbs until color answered, and breathed time with a measured squeeze at the chest. A twitch came, then a cryless gasp, then a soft clench of fingers. Warmth gathered back. She checked the mother perineum, torn but stable, and bound the wound with clean cloth. Wind fell a little, like a hand relaxing. She cleaned the tools in the basin, logged times and measures, and set both infants to their mother's skin. Outside, the snow worked at the eaves and began to lose. By the time the sky lifted from iron to pewter, the tracks had softened into shallow folds. She walked the sled beside the pony, not riding, saving heat for her core and grip for the runner. The river road reappeared in fragments, flags upright again, drift lines loosening their edges. Smoke rose straight for a moment from a few chimneys and then bent. Gentler, she stowed the sled in the lean-to and carried the satchel inside, the latches filmed with rime. The stove held coals. She fed it splits and opened the vent until the metal hummed. Instruments went to the basin, then to the rope line above the heat. The logbook took the table, times, names, measures, warnings, and 3 columns of follow-ups, each paired with a note for a neighbor to check. On the shelf, the insulin case sat repacked and ready. The tea jar was half full again. She ate broth with bread, slow, while feeling returned to her hands in small needles. The radio stayed quiet. In the quiet she laid out tomorrow's path, first the teen mother, then the elder. Then the fish camp, boy aiding a spare stop for the breech labor's grandmother. When she stepped back to the door, the day had settled. The pony stamped and shook frost from its forelock. She hung the parka, checked the coals once more, and let the heat gather. The storm had passed. The children breathed. The list would hold until the roads opened